Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us today. This webinar is on how to streamline and simplify workplace access for your employees and visitors. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the Editor-in-Chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and the webinar today is presented by HID Global. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items with you. Please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you could submit questions via the question box in that panel. We will have a Q&A with the speaker at the end of the presentation. You can send your questions in at any time, and they will be addressed afterwards. Please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access the question box. Also, if at any time you experience a technical difficulty or have another type of question, please send a message to us in that question section, and someone on our team will answer you privately. If you're interested in continuing education credits, please note you'll receive a certificate of attendance in an email from us here at Facility Executive after the webinar, and you can report that to your association for the CEUs. Now I'd like to introduce your speaker, Ian Lowe. Ian is Product Marketing Management Director for the Workforce Identity Management business at HID Global, and he's passionate about communicating all things related to identity, cybersecurity, IoT, cloud, and digital transformation. And in his 19-year career, Ian has been working on creating and launching successful cloud-based identity and security solutions that are used around the world today by top technology firms, financial services, organizations, and governments as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ian and look forward to hearing from you. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Ann. Great. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So yeah, I'd like to just take probably about 30 minutes to talk to you about, one, the future of work and how to streamline and simplify workplace access for both your workforce and your visitors. So as Ann mentioned, my name's Ian Lowe. I'm a Canadian that actually lives in the UK. I've been living in the UK for almost 20 years now, actually about 20 years now. I grew up in a small town in Alberta that consisted of just north of Calgary, just about 1,200 people, so a really small town. And I knew quite quickly that I needed to escape that small town, and the way to do that was become intelligent or smart about technology. And I really enjoy technology, and especially security technology. So that's how I ended up where I am today. And I've been with HID for almost 15 years now. So yeah, a long time. So with that, I'd like to get started. It's been a crazy year, one that has really changed the way that we work and we interact with our workplaces. And I believe that change is probably going to be permanent. I was speaking with a small, medium-sized law firm earlier this week, and they've returned to about 80% capacity in their offices. They're spread across the north of the UK, but what's interesting is that they had already, way before the pandemic hit, made the decision to reduce their office footprint. They knew that they knew that they weren't coming into the office as much as they needed to. They were pretty, mobile, and their teams were very mobile. So they wanted a smaller footprint, and they also provided their employees with the flexibility to work from home, which also helped them make that decision to reduce their work footprint. And what's interesting is we're seeing a lot of that change now because of COVID. We're seeing the large technology companies like Twitter and Facebook who are starting to or have already announced that they are enabling their staff to work from home permanently. Gartner, is talking about the shift and has been speaking to a lot of CFOs and polling those CFOs on that shift and that change in our work habits. We've got the CEO panel from PwC, and we got commentary from a lot of the journalists. I've read about 3 different surveys so far, and what's interesting is we, the workers, also aren't that comfortable with getting back to the office full time. One survey with over 1,500 people, almost 100% said they weren't comfortable with going back to the office, and they actually were quite productive working from home. That was 98.5% of the respondents to that survey. Another 6,000 people survey, had 75% that didn't want to go back, and another 2,000 person survey said 57% don't want to go back to their old hours. They're looking to be more flexible. Now, not all of us have the luxury of being, flexible. Some of us work in manufacturing or, in critical roles where we actually need to be in the office. But those that, are able to work from home have found it very, enlightening and a nice bit of freedom that we can get our work done in the place that we're most happy. And what this means is that we believe that there's going to be a real change in the way that we work. And I wanted to ask the audience, everyone on the call here, a question around that work. So just quickly over to Anne to ask that.
Thank you, Ian. And yes, as you'll see on the screen, we're asking if you, at your business, plan to return to work. If you plan to return to the workplace, what does that workplace look like for you? And please select one of the following to let us know what reflects what your organization is doing. And the choices there are: we will go back to how we were before the pandemic, a hybrid model, hoteling, where employees work on a schedule of their choice, or will you be 100% remote going forward, as far as you can tell, for the foreseeable future? So please let us know, and we'll show the results on the screen shortly. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. As you see on your screen there, a hybrid model, 68% there, nearly 3/4, and followed by 22%. We will go back to how we were before the pandemic, and 6 and 4 hoteling, and we'll be going 100% remote. So it looks like the hybrid's really a leader there. Thank you very much, and back to you, Ian.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, thanks everyone for taking part in that presentation, that poll. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my presentation going again. Here we go. I think that's working now. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes, it looks good.
We should be back. Okay. Sorry, are we back? It's not. I'm confused here.
Yes, your slide is back, Ian, to the quote
okay.
slide.
Wonderful. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much for responding to that poll. I've got one more poll here, and hopefully I'll be a little more smoother after this this slide. So I really believe that this means that the future of work is flexible, and that's going to have a profound impact on our security and access approaches and our workplace experience. So just another quick question: is your approach to workplace, what is your new approach to workplace access and security looking like? So just one other quick question and one other poll for you.
Sure. So there it is back on the screen. We'll ask you to vote in the second poll as well. And as you can see there, it's what security access policy changes have you made in your workplace since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic? And here you can select all that apply, please. So that's temperature checking, daily screening questions for employees or visitors, daily screening questions for employees and visitors. Every employee access must be approved before their arrival. And lastly, occupancy and social distancing reporting for contact tracing. So please let us know any or all of those that are being put in or have been put in place already. Okay, so we'll show the results on the screen now. And let's see here. We have 61% occupancy and social distancing reporting for contact tracing, 56% temperature checking, 54, every employee access must be approved before arrival, followed by 52% daily screening questions for employees and visitors alike, trailed by 30% daily screening questions for employees or visitors. So thank you very much again, and I'll hand it back to Ian. Look forward to your comments on that. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks. So hopefully you can see my screen again. Should be back to the screen.
Yes, it's back.
Thanks. Great, wonderful. And again, thanks everyone for taking part in that. It's really interesting. At HID, we've got a number of those. We're doing a number of those things to help return safely to work. Our employees are being temperature checked, especially in our main manufacturing sites, and we're also asking them to, they do get screened on a daily basis. They have to answer screening questions to check whether they're experiencing any symptoms, have experienced temperature, or have been in contact with anybody that might have been infected in the last number of days. And this really has an effect on our whole, experience in the workplace. And I guess the question for me is, how long is this kind of new access experience going to last? Is this permanent, or is this kind of something that will come and go? So the discussion points today really are, we're going to look at some of the challenges of managing identity across both digital and physical ecosystems, and the best practices for unifying and simplifying identity and access. And we're going to take a look at one of our customers, and also a look at a few of our customers have done some other things as well. And introducing a unified approach, we're going to, at the end of here, introduce, what a unified approach to identity and access management can do, and to help you become more flexible and nimble in terms of managing access for your workplaces. So we're going to look at one organization that was really, it's one of the largest tech companies globally. Their previous employee and contractor badging processes took a number of days and sometimes weeks to get new hires and contractors, with their workplace identities and the access credentials that they needed to access the buildings that they needed to. This experience didn't match their corporate mission or the experience they wanted for their employees, and it was a major bottleneck, effectively, to productivity. On top of this, their visitor management processes were outdated and did not provide their visitors with a visit experience that matched this new mission statement. So they came up with a vision. To get rid of this challenge, they came up with an overall vision for their access experience, for their workplace experience, and it was called the Day One Vision. And that vision really encompasses how long it would take to get access to for their employees and anyone, for that matter, that's been approved to the buildings they need access to. Well, let's start talking about identity. There are essentially three, and it all starts with identity, and that's why we're starting here. There are essentially three domains for identity. There's your citizen identity, the one that you use to travel the world with, like your passport or your driving license. There's the consumer identity, the one that you use to pay for things, and then there's the work identity, your business identity. And these are three very fundamentally different identity ecosystems and identity, different things. They have different requirements and also different challenges. And for me, it's, don't let your solution confuse them. It will fail, and we've seen this in the past. There are common technologies, but they'll all play a part. But the scalability, the deployment challenges are fundamentally different between those three pieces of identity. So it used to be that many of us, the workplace was more than just one office building or facility. Many of us spent our entire workday on the go, out in the field or on the road, and some of us would spend it in the office. But right now, we're pretty much, all of us are at home. But there's one thing we all need to access our workplace, and that's an identity and an identity credential. And for all of us, what that really means, and I'm a little bit provocative here, but identity really is the only perimeter that matters. Of course, we still need to secure other perimeters like parking, like doors, like rooms, like IT assets. But the perimeter that really matters most is your identity. It defines what you can access, when and where, and it provides, your organization with the ability to validate, who's in the building, and it's really important. But managing identity is hard. During a recent virtual European conference, a distinguished speaker around identity mentioned that we're all in danger of reinventing the wheel without learning from the past. It caused me to reflect on the identity lessons from my own past, from my own experience in my journey through identity management and security. And apologies to the speaker, I forgot exactly who made the comment, but identity management technology is easy, they said, and scalable identity management technology is hard. Securely deploying identity management technology is also really hard. And this next slide here really encompasses that. So if you think about it, we've got three different groups of people that we typically have to manage identities for, that we need to access our buildings. Our workforce, our employees, our visitors, and our partners, our contractors. And all of these groups of people require access to different buildings at different times. And in very large organizations, or where you've acquired multiple physical access control systems, that becomes difficult quite rapidly. So you may have acquired one access control, or you may have one access control environment for one building and then a separate access control environment for another building. And managing the access policies around those is done separately. It's not combined, it's not unified in any way. And then on top of this, you have your IT identities where the real trust is, where your identity is defined effectively, like Active Directory is very common in most enterprise organizations. And these IT stores don't necessarily contact or work with the physical access identity stores. And this causes lots of challenges. So one, you can't report and audit very easily across those two identity ecosystems, the physical identity ecosystem and the IT identity ecosystem. And you can't unify and set central policy for access rights and access management. So really, we need to remove the need for privileged access and just think about people. Everyone we have in our building needs access. And so we should look at taking the IT stance and adopting what's called a zero trust model, that everyone should be validated before they have access, whether they're an employee and trusted, or a visitor and untrusted, or a contractor. And what that means from a best practice is we really want to identify all our personas. And that's what this organization that I mentioned at the beginning with the day one vision, they went through the task of identifying all of the personas. And this is just a subset list. There's a lot more, obviously, that you can identify of who needs access to the building, like the employees, contractors, and visitors. And then those that need the access to the data. So the C-suite want their employees and visitors to have a great first impression and want to ensure compliance. Facilities want to know how many people are in the building, where they've been, and what time they were there. Physical security typically want to know their building is safe and secure and can provide detailed reports for auditing when it's required. Cyber and IT really want to know that their network is secure and the employees can access what they need when they need it. And the real estate team really want to know how space is being used and how many people are in that space at any one time, so they can make quick decisions on whether they need to scale up or scale down the amount of space that they have. And knowing who really matters, the challenge that we face is complexity with the multiple levels of ownership that's often disconnected. This complexity is amplified when you've got multiple locations that are spread out around the country or around the world. And on top of people, process, and technology, you have additional physical security areas that need protecting and monitoring. So be able to fully define these areas for every identity is critical. Who are they? Where do they have access to? Why do they have access? How long do they have access for? And who authorized their access? This is best practice number one. Best practice number two, manually disjointed access and auditing processes lead to very expensive audits, and also lots of downtime and lack of productivity. So best practice number two is all about moving to fully automated access requests, physical access requests, and audits. And if we look at what this organization, the process this organization went through, it was really cumbersome. So if you look at a new employee that wanted to visit another office, so San Francisco employee wanted to go to an office in San Diego, or Los Angeles, sorry. They would need to make a request by email to the San Francisco supervisor. That supervisor would then have to contact the Los Angeles supervisor, or may have to contact another contact if that supervisor wasn't available. That would take, on average, a couple of days. Finally, they would get a response. They would get the approvals and the setup in the access control systems, and then that would be approved. So on average, and this is the worst case scenario here I'm giving you, but on average, it could take several days and often weeks at a time to get approvals to go visit another office, which is frankly just ridiculous. And it made no sense at all for them, but that was the process that they had in place to ensure that the buildings that were being accessed by the right people, and that they could audit that access. It was very cumbersome, and it was full of manual processes. And on top of that, when it came time to audit the access requests, it was very difficult for the auditors. So an auditor would have to come in, make an audit request to the security team, the audit security team that was often centrally. That audit security team would then have to make another manual request to the building of the access report. That building access report was sent back to the audit security team, and then again sent back to the auditor, which would take several days at one time. Then the auditor would review that and send that back to the analysis back to the team. And they would then have to do that for each and every building. That's why many of their audits would take months at a time, and it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. So automating the access request process and automating the audit process was very critical to improving the overall workplace experience. So I've just shown the very complicated process to get access, and then what they have done is they've implemented and deployed a unified approach to physical access and identity management. So many organizations, or some of you may have heard of an acronym which we're very good at using in the security industry, which is PIAM, which is Physical Identity and Access Management, which typically is dealing with access orchestration and unifying the policy around access control for physical access management systems. And that's what they used here. So they implemented HID Safe as a unified policy engine to simplify and remove all of the manual request processes for requesting access to other buildings. And by unifying that approach, the request to get made on the same day from a branch or from an employee to go to a different office, and that request would be approved in a single click rather than having to go through multiple manual phases of email exchanges. It was just a notification be sent to the approver. The approver would just have to click a button and that approval would be done. The employee would get a notification immediately as soon as that was approved, and their access would be granted. At the same time, that whole process would be reported and logged in the audit log centrally. And that would be across multiple access control systems, not just one access control system, greatly simplifying the whole audit process for the organization. Best practice number 2 is when you implement a unified approach to physical identity and access management, you get rid of the need for bespoke integration, and you get that real, true unified access management and connectivity. And I'm going to go back to the same slide I showed you earlier, where you've got all of this complexity. You've got your group of employees that you need to manage access for. You then have visitors coming in that are either invited by your employees or coming in ad hocly to visit your employees. And then you've got your contractor base who may not exist in your identity trust store. They may not exist in Active Directory. It's really critical that you take this unified approach. And the advantage of that is when you implement something like a PIAM solution, a physical identity and access management solution, it sits in the middle of both your physical access control systems and your IT identity stores like Active Directory. And it talks to both of them and allows you to have a single view across both of those identities. And it allows you to unify both the management of the identity across both those ecosystems, and it allows you to manage the access control policies across both those ecosystems for all of those personas, your employees, your visitors, and your contractors. Not having a unified approach will mean that you're slow to respond to global emergencies like the pandemic we're in right now. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just one second here. So if we look at it, what this organization did is, because they have a unified approach to physical identity and access management, both from an employee and a visitor perspective, they were able to address the changes needed in visitor management access. So one of the big changes we saw right at the beginning of the pandemic was that many of the customers wanted to adapt their visitor access policies. And what they wanted to do was implement screening of visitors. And they wanted to ask them questions around COVID. They want to ask them, have they experienced any symptoms? Have they shown any temperatures recently? And have they visited any areas that are at risk from infection? And if they answered those, they wouldn't be allowed to visit. This is just an example of some of the companies that have adopted this solution did that quite rapidly. They wouldn't have been able to do that if they didn't have a unified approach. So they could implement that policy once and deploy that globally to all of their sites, to all of their offices. Whereas if you have a disjointed approach to visitor management, so you've got one visitor management system in one building and then a completely different visitor management system in another building, you wouldn't be able to set that policy down at a global level. And they were able to make this update with less than a week, 9 days it took them to make these updates and deploy these right when the pandemic started. And that's all down to the fact that they used a unified approach, a unified solution for this. So that's really where it comes down to. I want to introduce this concept of a unified identity and access management platform. And the advantages of a unified identity and access management platform is that you can, one, unify your identity management across both your physical and your cyber or IT identity ecosystems. You can unify access policy across all of your buildings and environments, wherever they may be. And you can unify the access controls across disparate access control systems. So if you have more than one access control system, you can set a single policy in the unified IAM solution and set that across all of your access control environments rather than have to going in and manually editing those in each access control environment. And you get additional applications, so you can actually start to get a clear view of your security risk stature or posture by getting a dashboard of who's got access to where physically, but also who's logging in from where using their, using their IT credentials, their tokens or their certificates or whatever they might be using. This is a true differentiator from, the standard identity providers that you see in IT systems and IT environments. So unified cyber physical identity provider is the backbone for orchestrating access. And these are the typical applications that you should be looking for in a unified platform. One is credential management. So this is your, the management of your badges for physical access, but also the management of your IT access credentials. So the tokens or the smart cards or the FIDO keys that you're using to access, cloud applications. And then the system must also have the ability to authenticate those credentials when they're being used to access your IT systems. So multi-factor authentication is another core application. Being able to manage visitors so that you can unify the reporting and the auditing across all of your credentials, whether they're for visitors or employees. Managing not only your physical access badges, but managing those digital credentials as well. So the certificates that might be used on smart cards to access VPNs, and managing your physical access orchestration. So this is unifying and centrally managing your access policies across multiple physical access control systems. And then really what's critical about this unified approach is having the reporting and the analytics centrally. Excuse me, I'm suffering a bit of a cold here. And being able to have a dashboard of what's happening across your whole security ecosystem and environment. Sorry, excuse me. So with these manual processes, when you don't have a unified approach to physical identity and access management and a unified approach to physical identity and access management, your manual process costs a lot of money. They result in productivity losses. But when you implement an automated solution, there are some things you need to consider, like the licensing and the system costs, the support costs, the data security and the enforcement. Those are all critical things to validate when you're moving to a unified approach, and the platforms can support you on your goals. And this organization that I talked to with the day one strategy, the day one vision, was able by adopting this unified approach, was able to decrease their identity request error rates by 49%, almost by 50%. And they were able to improve their identity and access automation by a significant 80%. And they reduced the bespoke integration costs by 37%, which was all significant savings across the board. And not only this organization, but some of the others that we have also worked with from a visitor perspective have been able to rapidly adapt to the global emergency with the, with flexible policy engine within the unified identity and access management platform. So rapid policy changes, within 9 days to, manage the risk of COVID, infections within the buildings by mitigating and validating visitors before they arrive by using screening questions. And ultimately, with a unified approach, they were able to hit that one-day vision. They can issue credentials. Their previous employee and contracting processes were taking days, sometimes up to a week to get new hires and contractors. They were able to reduce that down to and hit their vision of one day of badging in one day, which is phenomenal. They currently have around 50 locations that are using this environment, and that's growing to over 100 locations globally by the end of the year. So with that, I'd like to open up with any questions. And thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Ian, for that presentation, and thank you to all the attendees for sending in your questions. We'll now have some Q&A with Ian to address the questions that you sent in, and please continue to submit any. So, Ian, thanks again for the presentation. There was a lot of good information in your slideshow there. We'll start off with a broad question about the solution you've been talking about today. And the question is, how do you monitor facility occupancy with this type of solution?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Anne. And thanks for the audience for asking it. There's a couple ways that we monitor occupancy with this solution. One is we can take and consolidate the reports across multiple access control systems, and you can use those reports to validate who's in the building and when, and do an occupancy report against that, a consolidated occupancy report. The other way is we work and connect to another technology that HID provides, which is called location services, and that uses a Bluetooth low energy beacon technology and can accurately detect where people are exactly in the building and the timings that, and we can combine the two technologies to provide a very good view of occupancy, and those are the two options, and you can have either or both together.
Thank you. So can you, moving into that, the actual implementation of the system that we've been discussing today, in your slideshow, you had talked about and acknowledged that many facilities have different access control systems within buildings or perhaps across their facilities portfolio. So the question is, can you discuss integration of this HID global solution and how it works with different access control systems? So what would the integration process look like, generally speaking?
Yeah, another good question, thanks. So the integration with HID Safe or Workforce ID uses a standard, what we call agent framework that connects to these physical access control systems. And that's been built over many years of experience and integrations that we've done for thousands of customers around the world. The standard agent framework works with every PAC system that we've already integrated, and that's hundreds. So the most common ones, as well as ones that are less common and obscure. And the way that the agent framework works is that we connect either through standard APIs that the physical access control system manufacturer provides to us, or we have a standard interface that looks at the different schemas. So each physical access control system has a different schema for the way that it handles access control data. And for some of those, we've had to do a very specific schema to map the data back and forth between the two systems. So sometimes there's a standard API available and that maps very easily. And sometimes we have a very specific schema that we've had to map one for one to that access control environment. And the agent framework supports both of those integration types.
Okay, thank you. So then talking about taking a jump over to the hardware aspect, we do have a question on that as well. And you had mentioned that the readers need to be upgraded. So can you expand on this and what that entails as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So as companies move and migrate to newer buildings, they want to update their buildings or are building new buildings. Many of the car technologies that are available today and that have been used historically are built on older legacy technologies like 1356 megahertz or low frequency technologies. Those are open to security risks. Those are open to being hacking and duplicated and can be hacked. So the recommendation is always to go with the latest technology, and our most recent technology is a product reader line called HID Signal, which supports both the legacy technology and the newest technologies. And that Signal line supports the latest NFC interfaces. It supports BLE for mobile access. It also supports Open Supervised Device Protocol, or OSDP for short, which is a very secure way of communicating between the reader and the panel and the access control environment itself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have time for one last question, and this is specific to a project that's going on. So the question is, I have a client who uses HID Global now for some of their security needs. So this person is doing a tenant improvement on their client's building, and they're wondering, with the solution you've been talking about today, is there a mobile access capability, a mobile access point for head counts after an evacuation of a building. In an evacuation scenario, would a facilities person, security director, whoever it may be able to do head counts and understand where people are in that situation?
Yeah, so well, the whole point of the unified approach to identity management using something like Safe or Workforce ID is that you can report and have a dashboard on who's in the building in real time, and that's really critical, especially in emergency situations. Being able to see that, and those reports are available either on a browser or in a mobile app, as an example. So that's one way of doing that. But another way is to also combine that with a location services technology, where employees have the beacons and you can see in real time whether they're inside or outside the office. Most of the time, we see that mustering points from a mobile perspective don't work that well, because if you think about cities as an example, and large buildings in a city, many have a dispersal policy where you're not allowed to stick around and meet at a point because there's road traffic and other stuff that you can't block. So it works better to utilize either the access control data and the reports around that, or location services technologies.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Ian. It looks like we are out of time. I want to thank you for your presentation and for the Q&A today. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, and thanks to the audience for listening. Hope it was useful.
And to HID Global, thank you for sponsoring this presentation today. Our audience, of course, for attending today. And please note a recording of this webinar will be available online at facilityexecutive.com, as well as on the HID Global website, hidglobal.com. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.